Fanny Kelly, mother's desperate escape plan from Sioux captivity. My child, fall from this horse and run. These desperate words were Fanny Kelly's gamble with fate as 50 warriors led them into captivity. Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories for America's Forgotten Tales. When survival means choosing between impossible options, what sacrifices must a mother make? The answer lies in Fanny's next harrowing hours. The attack on the Kelly wagon train happened swiftly without warning. Fanny Kelly found herself separated from her husband and a short distance away from the wagon, with young Mary, instructed to remain quiet by their captors. Despite the chaos surrounding her, Fanny tried to maintain her composure, though her heart yearned desperately for escape, hopefully following the path her husband had taken. Reality quickly set in as Fanny assessed her situation. Watchful eyes surrounded them at every angle. She understood that any escape attempt would inevitably fail and potentially endanger the lives of all prisoners. This practical realization forced her to temporarily abandon thoughts of flight. Mrs. Larimer soon approached Fanny and Mary, visibly trembling with fear, her young son clutching her hand. She delivered the devastating news that all the men in their party had escaped, effectively abandoning the women and children to the mercy of their captors. "I do hope they have," Fanny responded, displaying unexpected pragmatism. "What benefit would it be to have them here, to suffer this fear and danger with us? They would be killed, and then all hope of rescue for us would be at an end." Mrs. Larimer's composure completely collapsed when she witnessed the Native Americans destroying her property. Her possessions consisted primarily of daguerreotype equipment, chemicals, picture cases, and specialized tools of the photographic trade. She had invested significant hopes in establishing a profitable photography business in the mining towns of Idaho. Watching her livelihood being systematically destroyed, Mrs. Larimer let out a wild, despairing cry. This outburst proved dangerous. Her scream attracted the immediate attention of the band's chief, who approached with a gleaming knife, threatening to end all her further troubles. In this world, the moment became critically dangerous. For Mrs. Larimer, Fanny's own fear intensified. She later recalled that her agony could be no less than that of my companion in misfortune. Her concerns extended beyond their immediate safety to the substantial material losses they suffered. The Native Americans had taken a large herd of cattle, groceries, and valuable goods that would have fetched particularly high prices in the mining regions. Throughout these initial moments of captivity, Fanny found her thoughts turning not to her husband's possible fate, but to the dark, uncertain future awaiting herself and little Mary. She harbored greater apprehension for Mary's future than for her own. These thoughts eclipsing any concern about material possessions. Meanwhile, Mrs. Larimer remained in acute danger as the chief's knife remained poised. Seeing Mrs. Larimer in immediate danger from the chief's blade, Fanny Kelly made a decision right away. Perhaps motivated by fear of facing captivity alone, Fanny approached the chief. She adopted a cheerful demeanor that contradicted her internal terror and successfully pleaded for Mrs. Larimer's life. "I endeavored in every way to propitiate our captors," Fanny later wrote, "but received no evidence of kindness or relenting that I could then understand." Despite this perceived indifference, the chief removed a wreath of colorful feathers from his own head and presented it to Fanny. She initially regarded it merely as an ornamental gift, unaware that it represented a significant token of his favor and protection, a fact she would only learn later. This simple act, though not immediately understood by Fanny, marked her for special treatment among the captives. The chief departed to collect his share of plunder, leaving the women and children surrounded by a special guard of armed men. Recognizing their powerlessness against what seemed an inevitable fate, they sat on the ground surrendering to despair. Darkness fell around them as they waited, the night obscuring the scene of destruction, while their captors completed preparations for departure. The first indication that immediate massacre was not their destiny came when a young Native American named Wakala approached, offering several articles of clothing. He communicated through gestures that they would need these items, implying their lives would be spared, at least for the immediate future. This small act of consideration introduced a fragment of hope into their desperate situation. The children clung to the women, their terrified expressions revealing a primal fear. Despite being adults, the women could offer little reassurance or protection, making the scene particularly heartbreaking. Fanny deliberately withheld information from Mrs. Larimer about the deaths of others in their party, fearing her companion could not endure such knowledge in her current state. Instead, Fanny attempted to encourage and enliven her, concerned that excessive emotion might hasten Miss Larimer's death or provoke their captor's anger. Both women harbored intense fears about their fate once the Native Americans completed their preparations for departure. Even if they escaped immediate death by scalping knife, they saw no prospect of release from bondage. Fanny was particularly tormented about the children's future, her mind crowded with all the accounts of Indian captivity she had ever heard. Stories of slow fires, pitiless knives, poisoned arrows, and torture by famine. These thousand nameless phantoms of agony passed before their troubled minds, creating such harrowing fear that Fanny believed the pangs of dissolution compared to them must have been relief. In this chaos of dread, prayer offered their only respite from total despair. When woe is come, Fanny reflected, the soul is dumb that crieth not to God. They lifted their trembling hearts upward, seeking divine mercy in their darkest hour. Waikala returned, bringing Fanny a pair of shoes and a smaller pair for little Mary. His kind expression as he presented these items reinforced his earlier indication that their lives would be spared. His gestures suggested they would need proper footwear for the long journey into captivity that lay ahead. He also delivered several books and letters, which Fanny gratefully accepted. Her mind immediately formulated a strategic plan. For these papers, she confided to Mrs. Larimer, "If I can retain these papers and letters, and we are forced to travel with the Indians into their unknown country, I shall drop them at intervals along the way. We are taken as a guide." Fanny hoped these breadcrumbs might help friends find and follow their trail, potentially leading to rescue. Alternatively, if an escape opportunity presented itself, the paper trail could help them retrace their steps to safety. The Native Americans gathered all property they couldn't transport into a pile and set it ablaze. The dancing flames illuminated the scene as their captors busily loaded horses with plunder, preparing for departure. The women watched as their former possessions and reminders of their previous lives transformed into ash and smoke. With preparations complete, the Native Americans approached the captives and signaled that they must accompany them. They pointed to several horses and motioned for the women to mount, marking the beginning of their journey into an uncertain captivity. The horse assigned to Fanny Kelly proved immediately problematic. It had belonged to Mr. Larimer and suffered from a crippled back. Fanny attempted to communicate this issue to her captors, but failed to make them understand the horse's condition. Despite her concerns, Fanny climbed into the saddle. Almost immediately, the horse collapsed to the ground, with Fanny underneath it. This accident aggravated her existing and caused her significant pain. More troublingly, it left her separated from the main group and trailing behind. A dread of being separated from the only white woman in that awful wilderness filled me with horror. Fanny later wrote, "The prospect of facing captivity entirely alone among their captors intensified her terror." The Native Americans quickly brought another horse and helped Fanny mount it. Before departing, Fanny frantically searched for Mary. The child stood helpless among the warriors. Fanny stretched out her arms imploringly toward her daughter. After a moment's hesitation, the captors yielded to her silent plea and brought Mary to her. Causing Fanny unspeakable joy in the small mercy, the journey began with her captors leading Fanny's horse, giving her a rope fastened around the horse's lower jaw. The natural world continued its indifferent cycles. Around them, cool air, star-filled sky, and the distant sound of water flowing over rocks. All nature seemed peaceful and pitiless in its calm repose, unconscious of our desolate misery. Fanny observed the cries of night birds and chirping insects reached her ears with painful distinctness. Their ordinary sounds now, a stark contrast to her extraordinary circumstances. As they departed the valley of Little Box Elder, Fanny strained her eyes, attempting to penetrate the shadows of the woods where their escaped friends might be hiding. Behind them, the smoldering ruins of their property collapsed into ashes. the smoke dissipating into the night air. I rode on in my helpless condition, with my child clinging to me without guide or support. Save my trust in God, Fanny recalled. Their captors moved northward, chanting their monotonous war songs as they traveled. The group covered approximately 2 miles through tall weeds and bushes before leaving the bottomlands and ascending several bluffs. They forded a creek where the Native Americans stopped to quench their thirst. Beyond this point, the hills became increasingly difficult to navigate, and the gorges appeared frighteningly deep when viewed through the inadequate starlight. During this challenging passage through darkness, Fanny conceived a daring plan for Mary's escape. She whispered in the child's ear, "Mary, we are only a few miles from our camp, and the stream we have crossed you can easily wade through. I have dropped letters on the way to guide our friends in the direction we have taken. They will guide you back again, and it may be your only chance of escape." From destruction, Fanny instructed Mary to slip gently down from the horse and lie on the ground momentarily to avoid detection, then retrace their path. "May God and mercy go with you," she whispered. "If I can, I will follow you." Despite her young age, Mary demonstrated remarkable judgment and understanding. Her eyes brightened and her heart visibly quickened at the prospect of escape. Watching carefully for an opportunity, when the warrior's attention was directed elsewhere, Fanny gently and carefully lowered Mary to the ground. The child lay still as their captors continued forward, unaware they had lost one of their prisoners. Fanny later described the emotional turmoil of this separation as indescribable agony. Though convinced she had given Mary the only possible chance of escape within her power, the terrible uncertainty of what might happen to a child alone in the wilderness tormented her. These thoughts consumed Fanny until she grew desperate and resolved to follow Mary, regardless of the risk. Seizing an opportunity, Fanny slipped from her horse under the protective cover of darkness. The horse continued forward without its rider, but Fanny's absence was quickly discovered. Warriors wheeled around and rode back in pursuit. Fanny concealed herself in the undergrowth and might have escaped detection if not for their hunting expertise. The Native Americans formed a line of 40 to 50 riders abreast, effectively covering large swaths of ground. As they swept the area, the horses themselves ultimately betrayed Fanny's position. Frightened by her crouching form, they stopped and reared up, revealing her hiding place to their riders. Realizing she had been discovered, Fanny stood up and quickly fabricated an explanation. She told her captors that Mary had fallen asleep and dropped from the horse. Fanny claimed she had tried to alert them but failed, and fearing they would ride too far to find the child, had dismounted to search alone. The warriors responded with anger and violence toward Fanny, warning her that any further escape attempts would result in severe punishment. However, they promised to send a search party for the child at first light. Left with no choice but to continue with her captors, Fanny's thoughts remained fixed on Mary, alone in the wilderness. She imagined her daughter's terror, but also maintained hope in divine protection. Poor little Mary alone in the wilderness, a little helpless child. Fanny reflected with faith to trust and courage to dare. That little trembling form, through the long hours of the night, kept watch. Fanny believed that Mary's innocence might somehow protect her. The lonely cry of the night bird had no fear in its melancholy scream for the little wanderer who crouched amid the prairie grass. The howl of the gray wolf as he passed, the lonely watcher might startle, but could not drive the faith from her heart. In her desperate hope, Fanny clung to the belief that surely God is just and angels will guide her faltering feet to friends and home. Consumed by thoughts of Mary alone in the wilderness, Fanny grew increasingly desperate. Eventually, she resolved to follow her daughter, regardless of the risk. Seizing a moment when the warrior's attention wavered, Fanny slipped from her horse under the protective cover of darkness. The horse continued forward, temporarily without its rider. Her plan quickly unraveled. My flight was soon discovered, and the Indian wheeled around and rode back. In my pursuit, Fanny later recorded, though she crouched in the undergrowth, believing the darkness might conceal her, she had underestimated the tracking skills of her captors. The Native Americans employed a sophisticated search strategy that demonstrated their hunting expertise. They formed a line of 40 to 50 riders, positioned side by side, effectively sweeping large areas of ground as they moved forward. In an ironic twist, it was not human eyes, but the horses themselves that betrayed Fanny's location. Startled by her hidden form, the animals stopped abruptly and reared up, signaling to their riders exactly where she was hiding. Realizing she had been discovered, Fanny showed remarkable presence of mind. She immediately rose and fabricated an explanation for her disappearance. I told him that the child had fallen asleep and dropped from the horse, she explained, claiming she had tried to alert them, but failed to get their attention. Fearing they would travel too far to locate Mary, Fanny said she had dismounted to search alone. This quick-thinking explanation only partially placated her captors. They responded with violence and issued stark warnings about any future escape attempts. The Indians used great violence toward me, assuring me that if any further attempts were made to escape, my punishment would be accordingly. Fanny wrote despite their anger. They promised to send a search party for Mary when daylight came. As Fanny continued under tighter guard, her thoughts remained with her daughter. She imagined the terrified child, alone in the vast wilderness, with only faith to sustain her through the night. The lonely cry of the night bird had no fear in its melancholy scream for the little wanderer who crouched amid the prairie grass. Fanny reflected the howl of the gray wolf as he passed. The lonely watcher might startle, but could not drive the faith from her heart. In her desperate situation, Fanny clung to hope that divine protection would surround her daughter. Surely God is just, and angels will guide her faltering feet to friends and home. Fanny Kelly's impossible choice that night, sending her child alone into the wilderness or keeping her in captivity, demonstrates how ordinary people summon extraordinary courage when facing unimaginable circumstances. Her story continues to captivate because it forces us to question, what would we do if forced to make such an unthinkable decision? Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories for more authentic accounts of survival against overwhelming odds. These stories matter not just as historical records, but as powerful reminders of the human capacity for courage, quick thinking, and hope even in our darkest hours.